Senator Skoye.
Madam President, I would move that the foregoing recommendations in the Conference Committee report on House File number 848 be now adopted and the bill be repassed as amended by the Conference Committee.
Senator Skoye, you want to discuss the conference report?
Thank you, Madam President. Members, I will go through some of the changes in the Conference Committee report and talk about some of the larger items that stayed the same. Senate provisions that were in the bill that remain mostly intact were the two prime provisions that were in the bill when it left the Senate floor, and they were where we really focused our energies as we were looking to bring tax relief to Minnesotans. And those provisions were provisions that were supportive of Minnesota families. The first one is the Minnesota Working Family Credit. It is really an initiative to help families as they move their way up the economic ladder in Minnesota. We also have provisions for Minnesotan students. Minnesota over the last number of years has done a good job of educating kids, but they have been accumulating ever increasing amounts of student debt. In this bill, in efforts that we had with the House, we had a very collaborative effort as we put together a first-in-the-nation proposal to give a credit for students that have percentages of debt that are over 10% of their income, up to a $1,000 credit to help them as they start work to make those payments. We have an LGA increase of $20 million, a CPA increase of $10 million. There are a program in here for the Riparian Protection Act, the grassy filter strips bill that we had on the Senate floor a few weeks ago, an initiative to help counties as they work to administer that important water quality improvement program. The Marketplace Fairness Act is a component in this bill. Minnesota merchants have been disadvantaged by sales that affiliates of businesses that don't collect sales tax. So we're working to try to bring those marketers and our Main Street marketers on a level playing field. Now this is going to take time, and the effective date is out, I think, 2.5 years. But eventually this is going to come to be, and it's going to be a great assistance to Minnesota marketers. There are a number of local sales tax provisions that remained in the bill, particularly the one I would like to highlight is North Mankato and Mankato. The House did some work that I think will make this an effective tool for these communities. They did reduce the dollar amounts slightly, and they narrowed up the project slightly, but I still think that it will work. And the Senate, the last number of years, has tried to have these regional centers that are more than one city work on a collaborative basis to try to have these projects done jointly. We think that it's better for the projects and better for the communities to have these done in a collaborative manner. And North Mankato and Mankato will be working together on some of the new projects. And then there's a large number of TIF provisions, local economic development provisions in the bill. And then a number of changes that the House brought in. As with all conference committees, it's a negotiation between the House and the Senate, and we end up getting some of our provisions, and the House will end up getting some of theirs. I need to go down a list of House provisions that the Senate agreed were important and should move forward. Dependent care credit. This is an initiative that the Senate did not have in its bill, but the House did. It's Governor Dayton has strongly been encouraging us to move forward on the dependent care credit. So we included that in this bill, House File 848. In addition to the student tax credit for student debt. We also are making an initiative to help prospective students as their families save for them for their future college education with two components of a 529 plan, a credit and a subtraction. We included a 179 carry forward in this bill for people that have 179 exemptions. If they aren't able to utilize that exemption in a given year, they can carry some of that forward. Pretty significant commercial industrial property tax class, property tax relief in this bill for CI. We're exempting the first $100,000 of value. Many of our Minnesota Main Street businesses are owned by families. This will be a significant benefit for them as they will be exempt from paying statewide business property tax on the first $100,000 of their value. The House brought an initiative to try to help our rural schools as they have had challenging times bringing their facilities to modern and current standards to make sure that the educational opportunities of the children that live in these rural areas are comparable and equivalent to other areas of the state. Because of the preponderance of agriculture land, a lot of times these school districts were having a real challenge to pass a building bond levy. And so there's a proposal in here that 40% of the school bond credit be paid for by the state. Significant benefit to those property owners and also the school districts. Hopefully they'll be more successful in their bond efforts. There is the removal of the tobacco indexing. Originally, when that proposal moved forward, the advocates weren't supportive of indexing. I think they are now, but the House had two indexing proposals. They had an indexing removal for the statewide business property tax and this one for the tobacco tax. The Senate chose the one that had the least impact on the long-term viability of the general fund, the smallest economic impact going forward. Senator Dietzick carried a real interesting proposal forward called a New Market Grant. These are grants that will go to community banks that work in lower income disadvantaged areas trying to do economic development in these areas. It's a very, very interesting grant program. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to learn from some of the successes that they do as this is modeled on a federal tax credit that has been around for a year and demonstrated significant success, and hopefully we're able to replicate that. And then finally, we have a beefing up of the military credit for active service. Current law is that is capped at $30,000 of income. We're proposing, this bill raises that to $50,000 and increases the credit from $750 to $1,000. And at this time, I would like to mention that there will be, I think, 5 other tax provisions coming forward later on this evening that'll be in the supplemental bill of Senator Cohen's. And one of those is the removal of the property income tax on military pensions, which certainly will impact these veterans that have served Minnesota. So we have the changes in front of us of House File 848. The total bill is around $258 million in this year, $544 million in the next biennium. Really is a very progressive bill providing middle and working families of Minnesota tax relief. It's challenging to make a progressive tax cut bill, but this bill really truly is. When you look at the working family credit, the student loan debt credit, the dependent care credit, the work in the 529 area and the vets credit, it's a total of $116 million and $237 million in the out years. that are very progressive family-friendly credits. There's property tax relief in this bill, statewide CA exemption on the first 100,000. As I mentioned, LGA, the ag bond credit, the county aid.
Senator Skoye, just a minute. It's getting more difficult to hear. If you hold the microphone a little closer to your mouth, and if everyone else would be quiet. Thank you.
And then, of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the federal conformity component. We have had one-year federal conformities for the last number of years, as the federal government has done their conformity in December and for 1 year. This year, they made some of the conformity issues permanent and some of them longer-term, multi-year. And we are conforming with all of those except Section 179 and bonus depreciation. In this bill is a Sustainable Forestry Initiative redo. In Minnesota, if you've been paying any attention to what's going on with our forest lands, there has been a number of situations where these forest lands now have been sold to private companies and changed from forestry to other uses, including agriculture. Potlatch Corporation has decided to divest itself of its forest lands in Minnesota. I was visiting with the Potlatch individual, and we have proposed this redo of the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, and what he had told me is, he said, Senator Skoye, if what you're proposing is a redo of the Sustainable Forest Act had been in place 10 years ago in Minnesota, we would not have chosen to divest ourselves of our forest lands. So what we have done is extended the time limit that people can sign up and commit to have easements and contiguous nature of their forest lands so that they maintain these large tracts of forest, maintain them for use in the forest industry, maintain them so there's access for the public for hunting and other recreational opportunities. And I'm trying to encourage the remaining balance of the Potlatch lands to be sold off to some other landowner that'll keep them contiguous, because northern Minnesota, part of the glory and the greatness of that part of our state is these large tracts of forest that we have and Minnesotans are able to utilize and recreate in. There were a few sales tax exemptions. That's kind of running down the list of what's in the bill. As I indicated, it's a really good bill for Minnesota families. I would ask for your support, and I'd hope for a green vote.
Discussion on the motion to adopt the conference committee report. Senator Gazelka.
Thank you, Madam President. Members, so I was on the tax conference committee as the Republican on the Senate side. I can tell you that there were 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats, 5 senators and 5 legislators, a mix of rural Democrats, a mix of metro Democrats, and rural and metro Republicans. So it was a mix of people. At the end of the day, it's half a loaf. And what I mean by that is I got about half of the things that I wanted, and the other side got maybe half of the things they wanted, and half of the things I wanted I didn't get, and half of the things they wanted they didn't get. And it's and that's why I would say it's a half a loaf. And I think no matter who you are, you have to look at this from one angle and you'll see things you like or don't like depending on your perspective. I really wish that it had been more targeted tax relief. We have a number in there. We followed the targets, and I want to compliment the entire conference committee, both sides of the aisle, both House and Senate, with the numbers that we worked with. I think we did good work. But it wasn't enough. You know, there's a few things that I really felt that we should have gotten that we didn't. The inflator on business property taxes into the general fund and Social Security were a couple that come to mind right now. But I'm really glad we didn't yet do the working family credit because it really wasn't ready for prime time. And so, again, a half a loaf. I think we did particularly well by veterans. In this bill, and in another bill coming, if you combine the two, we accomplished some significant work for our veterans that served more than 20 years. They will be applauding, and I'm glad that we did that. We helped the ag community related to business or related to property taxes, which I think was really important. It is not a perfect way to do it. We do need to fix the school formula. The per pupil funding in rural Minnesota is not enough. We just haven't found a way to fix it yet, and that's why we went this route. There are things for students, there are things for parents that want to save for their kids' college education. We dealt with some policy language related to some of our local businesses that were being cut off by their investors and people that use them that moved to another state. We fixed the language so that they wouldn't feel prompted to do that, and we helped small businesses in a significant way. And so it's a half a loaf, members. I'm going to vote for it, but I could find a lot of things that I don't like about it either, but that's what we did, and I'm thankful for the committee and how we worked together.
Senator Eaton.
Thank you. First of all, I want to commend the Tax Committee and the conferees on the great job they did on this bill. There's so many great things for families and students and communities and small businesses. Unfortunately, I do have to make one thing that I am opposed to, which is the repeal of the excise tax rate indexing for cigarettes. This is a penny-wise, pound-foolish item. The healthcare costs and the cost to people's health and lives is it's hard to calculate. There's data that shows that raising the cost of a pack of cigarettes keeps younger people from starting smoking because they don't have that much cash on hand. So by freezing the excise tax at the current rate of $2.90 a pack, it's likely that as wages and such increase, that cigarettes will become more affordable for our youth. I find this rather dismaying from a public health perspective, and that's all.
Senator Osmek.
Thank you, Madam President. Will Senator Skoye yield for a question?
Senator Skoye will yield. Senator Osmek.
Thank you, Madam President. Senator Skoye, I'm trying to translate Article 4, Sections 3, 4, and 5 onto the spreadsheet, and I'm having a difficult time tracking where that's going to. Could you define on the spreadsheet which lines Article 4, Sections 3, 4, and 5 translate into the spreadsheet for me?
Sections 3, 4, and 5.
Senator Skoye.
Thank you, Madam President and Senator Osmek. That is the quill provision, the marketplace fairness provision. So that is the provision I talked about, had the delayed effective date that we're trying to bring the sales tax fairness. And if you would like some more detailed information on that, I would like to yield to Senator Rest. She really, truly is the very knowledgeable person on this that will answer your question accurately and more with more information than I would be able to.
Senator Rest.
Thank you, Madam President. It's line 163, Senator Osment, and it shows 0. At this point, the way we have brought into the statutes this provision, it has an effective date July 1 of 2019, or whenever the federal government, either through an act of Congress or the courts, reverse the Quill decision. When either of whatever the earlier of those is, and there's already a court decision, a court case from South Dakota in the courts now, if that decision overturns Quill, which previously disallowed or denied the assertion of states to collect sales tax on items purchased in the state but sold by out-of-state sellers that didn't have nexus in Minnesota. So that it's a tricky kind of calculation with regard to that far ahead effective date. It would be my hope that when it does come in, we will have the opportunity to lower the sales tax rate.
Senator Osmek.
Thank you, Madam President. Will Senator Rest yield for another question?
She will yield. Senator Osmek.
Thank you, Madam President. Senator Rest, do you have any idea, even a ballpark, on what that actual dollar figure would be, assuming that that tax generation would actually occur?
Senator Rest.
Thank you, Madam President. We've had different estimates over the years. I think we really don't know what's going to be happening in the economy, so we have to take that into account. I would expect, however, that the amount of sales tax revenue right now that we are foregoing because sellers are not, remote sellers are not collecting and remitting the sales tax is in the ballpark of about a couple $100 million, maybe less, but in that, it's considerable. And again, when that happens, and I think it's going to happen. They're going to give us that right, one way or the other. The courts or by Congress, that we should be looking at reducing the sales tax rate.
Senator Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you, Madam President. Would the author yield for a couple of questions?
He will yield. Senator Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you, Madam President. Real quickly, Senator Skoye, the egg tax credit, I understand that is ongoing, that 40% when it comes to referendums. Is that correct?
Senator Skoye.
Thank you, Madam President. Senator Ingebrigtsen, yes. And that, just if you would allow me to expand briefly, that is one of the challenges of dealing with the situation we had this year, which is where we had a larger percentage of one-time money in this year than we had in the tails for ongoing. Tax policy needs to be consistent, and that means it needs to be more than just one-year initiatives, and so that is an ongoing initiative that we are proposing.
Senator Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you. And another question, please, if the author would.
He will yield. Senator Ingebrigtsen.
The sales tax on line 230 in that area, lawful gambling sales tax, a lot of my smaller legions and whatnot that do the charitable gambling, does that pertain to that, Senator Skoye? And if so, was that a reduction? Are they going to see some money? They were paying sales tax, I believe, on the gifts that they were actually giving to groups after bringing the dollars in.
Senator Skoye.
Madam President and Senator Ingebrigtsen, that is not a change item.
Okay,
Senator Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you. And just one more question, if I could, Senator Skoye. As you know, I've talked to you over the last 2 years about the excise tax that the farm wineries have been paying, and I know that was a other contentious issue. Not contentious in that it was a lot of money. In fact, I think it was in the $80,000 to $85,000 range. But I know the farm wineries have been after that for at least 2 years. Can you give me a reason as to why we still weren't able to do that? You gave me a hearing this year, the year before. You kind of gave me the nod that it was going to be in there. But we've got members, we've got a lot of wineries here that are looking at this little break that they have been paying for some time when other parts of the industry are not. So I'm really, if it's not in here, Senator Skoye, I wished it would have been, and I'm not real pleased with that. But maybe in years to come we can talk about it. But I don't believe it's in here, is it?
Senator Skoye.
Thank you, Madam President. Senator Ingebrigtsen. No, it is not, and we had a good conversation about it, and Senator Gazelka kind of joined in the conversation as a member of the Commerce Committee. And it's unresolved if it's in violation of the Federal Commerce Clause, where we would be treating in-state marketers differently than out-state. And I do understand that we have a comparable credit for brewers and also for micro distilleries, but that will have to be resolved, I believe, before we move forward on the winery provision, and I think it might have an impact on those other two credits also, but it's an unresolved area right now.
Is there any more discussion on the motion to adopt the conference committee report? All those in favor of the motion say aye. Opposed, nay. Motion prevails. The Secretary will give House File 848 its third reading.
House File Number 848, a bill for an act relating to financing and operation of state and local government. Senator
Skoye.
Thank you, Madam President. I just would briefly like to thank the conferees, a great group of legislators on both sides, the House and the Senate. I know when Senator Gwiazdowska was talking about us and them, he truly is talking about us, the senators, and them, the House members. And we worked very well together as a team, well, maybe most of the time. I can't not thank Governor Dayton and his Commissioner Bowerly. Really very involved in the conference committee. Commissioner Bowerly was there just about all the time with input from the department, telling us how they would be able to administer the proposals that we are bringing forward. And I'm not going to go through all the staff, but everybody here knows what a great group of staff we have, and we couldn't do the work without it. I need to thank Chair Davids in the House and his conferees. They're all a great group. The long-serving and the short-serving nonpartisan and partisan staff in the House is just just a real strength of the legislative process and Tax Committee, and Nora and Shelby and Jack and Eric, they all of them are just great. And one final thank to the Stephen Rubis.
Senator Nenow.
Thank you, Madam President. My apologies to Senator Skoye. I intended to get up before he did to give him the privilege of closing comments. But there was just one item I wanted to note on here that Senator Osmick touched on that I think members, I just want to make sure that all the members are aware. I mean, there are a lot of things in this bill, as Senator Gazelka said, that would get people to vote for this bill, but there are a lot of things in this bill that many would consider not really good and, in fact, maybe concerning. And just the one that I want to touch on is what Senator Osmick talked about with the nexus language. This is essentially Senator Rest's bill. And the fiscal note from earlier this year actually indicated, because of some legal vagaries, they couldn't assign a specific dollar figure to it. But in the narrative, it said it would be more than $200 million per year, so $400 million for a biennium. And if you look at the spreadsheet that was handed out, and it should be on the member's desk, line S7, if you look when this is fully implemented into a full biennium, this bill, there's $543.5 million in net tax reductions, $543 million. If the language in this bill becomes law and is implemented and is taxed the way that this is written, that sales tax will be $400 million in a biennium. And so I wanted the members to be aware that with the language in this bill, there's no language, and the author can correct me if I'm wrong, but I did not see any language that implemented an automatic sales tax reduction. A new body in 4 years or 5 years or 6 years will have to affirmatively choose to lower the sales tax in order to accomplish that net zero that Senator Ann Rest indicated maybe we would like to do at some point. And the members here need to ask themselves, when is the last time the state of Minnesota lowered the sales tax? In my lifetime, it hasn't happened. We sort of, kind of, with Jesse Ventura, had those rebates one time. So we have a $543 million net tax reduction in this bill, but once it kicks in and is fully implemented, a $400 million tax increase, which brings that net down almost 80%. And I just want the members to be fully aware of that.
Is there any further discussion? Senator Rest.
Thank you, Madam President. I would just point out that the tax collections that would be coming in are owed right now. They are owed right this minute. And what the provisions are in the bill is just reaffirming the right of the state to collect them and setting out a process to do that. Up until now, those sellers have refused to remit sales tax to the government that is owed. They're scofflaws. We often give the Department of Revenue dollars to go after those folks who don't pay their taxes, and what we are setting in place is a system, a marketplace provider system, that will reassert that right. And quite frankly, in almost every bill, we don't broaden the sales tax base at all. We've tried it, but we don't do it. We give sales tax exemption after sales tax exemption after sales tax exemption. We narrow the base while still keeping the same rates. But it is a challenge, and we can't really commit future legislatures, but I think this is going to be a fascinating area of sales tax reform in the next few years for this legislature, and I hope everyone will be interested in participating in a reform of the sales tax system as we get those collections of sales tax that are currently owed but not paid by remote sellers.
Senator Han.
Thank you, Madam President and members. I appreciate, first of all, the work of the conference committee, and I appreciate the work of the other body and the conferees on this bill. I know worked very hard. And it is a compromise bill. I think it's unquestionably true that this is probably not the bill that we would see if the other party, the Democrats, controlled everything, and it's certainly not the bill that we would see if Republicans controlled both bodies. But I think we need to have some context here before we pass this bill. Let's not forget that in 2013, the Senate DFL raised taxes by over $2 billion. And that created a surplus of about $2 billion that quickly got incorporated into the budget in 2015. And so we have been collecting more and more revenue from the people of Minnesota in the last 4 years. Total tax collections are up 20% since 2012. Income tax collections are up 25%. Sales tax collections are up 20%. Property tax collections are up 10%. So we are collecting more and more money from the people of the state of Minnesota every year. We have a state budget that is now $42 billion. That is an 18% increase from what it was 4 years ago when the Senate Democrats took control. 18% growth in 4 years in the state budget. But there were two things that we left undone from the budget of last year that we've talked about this year in this body before. There were two things that were left undone. We didn't do a transportation bill, and we didn't do a tax bill. And we had a $900 million surplus left on the bottom line specifically to address those two things. At least that's what I thought, and I think that's what the people of the state of Minnesota thought. And now we're seeing here one part of that. We don't know what the transportation bill is going to look like. We hope we'll see something a little bit later this evening. But we do see here in this tax bill that there are some tax reductions. And as far as I'm concerned, it's always a good day in Minnesota when we're able to begin to scale back some of the tax increases that we've had in the past. But the $190 million in reductions in this bill, that amounts to less than 20% of the total surplus that we had. So the rest, the 80%, the rest of it got spent. The Senate Democrats spent 80% of the surplus, 80%. But there isn't anything in this bill that is an across-the-board rate cut. There isn't anything in here for Social Security, pension payers who are paying taxes on their benefits. So there are things that are not in this bill that many of us have thought and have argued for the last couple of years of things that we need to do. We need to reduce the burden of taxation on the people of the state of Minnesota. And this bill doesn't do that. So there are lots of things in this bill that I think are very good, and I think they're going to be very appealing for many members as they go back and talk to people in their district, and that is a good thing. But in the big picture, let's not forget where we've been the last 4 years. We have seen massive tax increases, massive spending increases. We have not seen the reform out of our health care system that many of us came here wanting to do, knowing we have a big problem. We have not, at least at this point, addressed our transportation needs, and we're going to have to continue to do that. So I think there's reason to vote for this bill, and there's reason to vote against it. I'm going to vote against it. Not so much for what is in the bill, but for what is not in the bill, for the things that we didn't do, the things that we said we were going to come here to do this year, and I think we would have done, except that we didn't have a majority in this body that was willing to make that commitment and make good on that commitment. So members, we've got a little bit more to do tonight. We're looking forward to a transportation bill at some point. We'll see what we get with that. But I, for one, I'm a little disappointed in our efforts here. I think we can do better.
Are there any other final comments? Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Madam President. Members, on February 3rd, a fire absolutely decimated and took a small community in my Senate district, Madelia, a population of 2,200 people, to their knees on February 3rd. I just want to remind folks that whenever something like that happens, this body and both chambers and the governor rally together. And I would just like to personally thank Senator Skoye for listening to the needs of this small community and the people that want to rebuild, want to raise their children there in that community, but they needed help from the state. And Senator Skoye, you and your tax committee and then the conferees listened to the issues that came from that community, listened to me, and the bonding proposal actually came up with a better proposal than what I had presented, and I am very, very grateful for that. I'd also like to just thank you may not want to go through the list, but you're Mr. Hurd and Diane Patnoid and Steve Peterson were very kind and very good to me, and I really appreciate that. And they were very good to this community also, which has a huge, just that generosity expands greatly through that whole southern Minnesota. So I am in support of this bill. It's not perfect. Even if I didn't have a Madelia per se in this bill, I would be voting for this bill because I do believe it's very good for Greater Minnesota, and I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Senator Miller.
Thank you, Madam President. Chair Skoye, I think you missed it in the summary, or if you didn't, I missed it when you were describing it, but there's a very important provision in this tax bill for those of us who represent border communities with Wisconsin. It's a little bit of a new reciprocity program, and Chair Skoye, I want to thank you and Chair Davids and the conferees for including this important provision in the tax bill.
Is there any other discussion? Senator Skoye.
And thank you, Madam President. And members and Senator Rosen, you're welcome. I do have to say that, you know, this tax bill and other tax bills are really about Minnesota communities and people and families, and you always try to take the issues that they bring to you and make sure that they work. But your goal really is to help the communities across the state and the people across the state. And you know, this is it's a right-sized bill for what we have. You know, we lost $800 million in the February forecast. So I think we are just a touch cautious to try to make sure that we don't slide into a deficit scenario. And it's a modest bill. It's a right-sized bill. It does a lot of good things for Minnesota families. I mean, the working family credit is just great. The two provisions for prospective student and past students of higher ed institutions is really, really good. I just hope people will look at that. The The property tax relief for, Minnesota businesses that are scattered across our state, really good provision. And for the families in Minnesota, I'd hope you'd give me a green vote this evening.
Seeing no further discussion, the Secretary will take the roll. He's coming? Okay. Here he is. All members having voted that desire to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 55 ayes and 12 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to.